Okay, despite being known as the inspiration behind The Devil Wears Prada, Vogue editor-in-chief Anna Wintour told Page Six that no one is scared of her at the magazine, apparently. So do you think, though, that you need to be intimidating to maintain leadership or authority when you're running things? Interesting. Mal, what do you think?
Intimidating or fearful. It's funny because we're talking about a big generational thing here. I think for a certain generation, I'm Gen X, I think most of us are Gen X, we were raised by tough parents, tough leaders, tough teachers, tough everything.
I hear a quiet clap in the back there.
Yeah.
There's some claps that want to come out.
It's how we were raised. Tough was good. Tough love was a term that people used all the time. That's how you're going to raise a good kid, tough love. So we maybe have been raised to be able to handle or respect that kind of boss today. I respond very well to that. However, you also cannot raise the generation today, the Gen Zs, the Gen Alphas. You can't raise them for their generation. When we were raised in a very different time, we got to raise them for their world. And their world is very different than ours. I have a girlfriend who runs a huge company, and she has a lot of young people working for her, a lot of young millennials and the Gen Zs. I can't tell you who she is because every day she says someone is crying in her office. Every day someone's crying in her office. Why? Because someone talked very harshly to somebody in the office and they don't like it. And I'm not saying this to put down Gen Z. They have been raised really differently than us. They have been raised that just showing up is enough. We were raised that you don't just show up, you turn out over and over and over again. This generation,
hold on, but Gen X is raising them.
Yeah.
Yes, but yeah, we are guilty as the helicopter parent generation. We have done a major disservice to the young people today.
I don't know.
We have.
I was a manager for a time in my career. I initially started out as a producer and all of a sudden got an increase. So suddenly I was in charge of the same people who were once my colleagues. This was a really hard position to be put in because suddenly these people who I consider my friends, I would go out for lunch with and drinks with and whatever, I had to manage them. And for the most part, almost every single person on my staff was extraordinarily gracious about it. They had an intrinsic work ethic already. I didn't have to be on top of them. But there was one or two people of that group who saw an opportunity, I think, and put me in a very difficult position where I had to be questioning certain things of like, where was that money gone? Where was this? And in fact, it ended up in one person ending up being let go. And that was a real learning lesson. I still take away from that. My managerial or leadership approach was to be kind, was to be generous, was to assume the best of my staff that I mostly chose or trusted, had seen their work ethic. But there would be two people. But I don't think that that means that you should, that leadership then needs to come down with an iron fist. Because again, 90% of the people were respectful with me being kind.
So I'm an executive director of... I'm the executive director of The Walrus, and we have a print publication. And, this stereotype of, the intimidating editor-in-chief, that exists throughout the industry. It also exists in TV newsrooms. Like, this was, I would say, the norm for a lot of leaders, managers, directors in the 80s, in the 90s. It's definitely changed because to run a media organization in this time, you really have to play to the strengths of your team. So for me, the approach I take is I want to create, develop, and support other leaders. And the best compliment is if I can leave a meeting, if I can get out of the room and no one notices it because other leaders have stepped up and are leading. So I think the goal of a leader is actually to create more leaders.
Can I poke a little bit?
Sure.
Have you noticed this shift in the younger workforce coming in, requiring different things out of you, or you having to modify for them?
Yes, and I would say it's probably the most popular topic when executive directors are talking to each other. But I also think it's on us as leaders, as managers, to teach people who are new to their careers how work works in 2025. Because it's very different than how work worked for their parents. It's very different than when they were in school during COVID and trying to figure things out on screen.
All really valid points, but sadly, I think that you do need to be a little bit intimidating to your staff, especially if you're a woman of color, if you're young. I think it does help you. And I've seen in many different, I've worked in a lot of different places, and as much as everybody can complain about their boss, the one that everybody's afraid of, everybody works a little bit harder because no one wants to get in trouble. No one leaves early when they're a little bit afraid of the boss. They actually stay a little bit later because they want the boss to see that they're working really hard. So there is something to it. And I worked on a show where I had a bunch of young people who weren't that much, I wasn't much older than them. And I wanted to be their buddy in the very beginning because I'm like, yeah, I understand. I speak the language. And I quickly realized that I did not have the respect of any of them, and that I had to channel my mother and be like, okay, everybody listen, no, you're not. And then all of a sudden I was getting the respect. All of a sudden now they're doing their job, and I'm like, it's interesting. People say they don't want that, but in reality, people they react more to the person that they're a little bit afraid of. So it's nice to say we don't want that intimidating boss, but my experience, we work a little bit harder. We pay a little bit more attention.
I wonder if there's a distinction, and that's
do.
fair. I would just say, and I know we have to move on, but I wonder if there's a distinction between being clear and firm and having boundaries and people knowing what's expected of them, and if they are disappointing you, you tell it, versus being like this kind of what we had the impression of Anna Wintour from the Devil Wears Prada.
A devil.
A devil, exactly. And we've all had the devil bosses too.
I've worked with a person
right?
like
And you might produce better work, but at what cost?
How many years? Not in the long term. You're out of there fast.
That's right.
It's
You're
short
out of there
term.
fast.
It's short term with fear.
And you're stressed out. And I think there's a fine line between intimidating and terrifying.
That's right.
And some people just don't know that line. So it's
Yeah, because there is a line out there that people don't quit companies, they quit bosses.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So,
Hey, you, come a bit closer. We've got so many more must-see interviews, spicy debates, lifestyle tips, and pop culture moments. So subscribe to our channel by tapping the logo below and don't miss out.